everybody. Thanks for joining me. I'm Hallie Hara. Today's topic is making the most of your time, employing effective time management strategies as an extern. So those of you who know me know that I wore an academic success hat for many years, and I also do work in the externship space. And so I am constantly checking in with my students to see how they are balancing their field work in addition to their course load as a law student. And so usually things start out quite well at the beginning of the semester, but then at some point, whether it's increasing responsibility at your fieldwork site as an extern or increasing demand from your courses, most students tend to get a little stressed about time management at some point during the semester. So I thought it was worth our time to spend a little bit of time reminding ourselves of some good time management techniques that you can use to not only get the most out of your externship hours, but also to balance your coursework at the same time. So we'll start with those laws of time management. The first one is Illitchs Law. You may be familiar with it, but really Illitchs Law just demonstrates the importance of taking breaks. So after a certain amount of time, the research shows that your productivity decreases. And so, again, reminds us to take those breaks. And really, the data shows us that our minds can really only concentrate for about 90 minutes at a time. And so after that, it's sort of like trying to cook with a diminishing heat. So even if you are at your externship site for only 4 hours in one day, you still need to take those breaks, because after 90 minutes, if you're working diligently on a writing project or on research, your productivity is going to decrease unless you take a short sort of mental break. So that's something to keep in mind. Parkinsons Law is something I tend to think about almost every day, and that's work expands or contracts to fit the time allotted for its completion, right? So the example I have here is sending an email. So if I say to you, please send this email by the end of the week, today's Monday, it will take you probably until Friday to send that email. Conversely, if I said, look, you have 10 minutes, can you send an email to this person letting them know X, you would take care of it in those 10 minutes. So the more time you allow to complete the task, the longer it will take. So you need to structure your time to make sure you complete your activities. And so, this will require some trial and error, but where I see this coming up a lot is when students are working on a long-term project at an externship, and, their supervisor says, no hard deadlines, just get it to me whenever you can. Invariably, it ends up taking the semester. So even if your supervisor doesn't give you a deadline, create one for yourself to hold your feet to that fire. And at some point, it just needs to be done. It doesn't need to be perfect. And so really set a reasonable amount of time for tasks, not a schedule that's going to have you working 24/7, because we know from Illitchs Law that your productivity will decrease. So just be mindful of how long you are spending on a task and try and designate an appropriate amount of time, whether that's for your externship work or your schoolwork. Multitasking is a myth. I can say this time and time again. I still hear people saying, I'm really good at multitasking. No one is good at multitasking. That means that you are good at task switching because multitasking, science tells us, is not a thing. And so cognitive science shows us that multitaskers do less and miss information. And so it takes you an average of 15 minutes to reorient yourself to a task after a distraction. And your efficiency can drop by, the statistic is staggering, as much as 40%. And your long-term memory will suffer if you are studying. So what can we do to increase our focus, right? Because we know we can't be, trying to study for, I don't know, an upcoming, oral argument you have to make. You're preparing for that and you're trying to do externship work and you're doing other things at the same time. It's really just impossible. So let's put aside the idea that we can do it all at once and focus on some strategies for staying focused to make the most of your time. One strategy I talk about often is the Pomodoro Technique. You may or may not know about it. I'll just touch on it briefly. For people who just try this for the first time in law school, it depends on you, but some people it's just eye-opening. It's like, oh my gosh, where has this been? And I know it's often used in med school as well. And what it does is it just makes you aware of how your mind is working and gives you the ability to consciously decide how you deal with interruptions. So, it tells us, how to effectively use our time. And so it's real simple. All you need is a kitchen timer and a to-do list in order of priority. So presumably you will have, more than one project at a time, usually at your externship site. So figure out what it is that's on your agenda and what you want to prioritize in terms of when it's due or based on the time you have in a given day. And then the Pomodoro cycle is 25 minutes followed by a 5-minute break, and it repeats 3 times, and after which there's a longer break. And so it's just short, and it doesn't have to be 25 minutes. It can be whatever you make it. It's just short bursts of concentrated time where you're really, really, really hyper focused and you're going to get so much done as compared to this distracted multitasking approach that we sometimes take that really doesn't result in much meaningful work. So, this is a proven technique. Give it a try. And what it asks you to do is to address both our external distractions and internal distractions. So in that 25 minutes, you really don't want to be dealing with either type of distraction. What I found surprising when I first looked at the research around the Pomodoro method, I thought, phones and social media and email and text and all those things were going to be the biggest distractions. And actually, those are distractions. Those are external distractions that reduce our attention spans. But the internal distractions are far more of a problem for most people. It's our mind's way of telling us that we're not at ease, we're worried about failing, this seems too complex, I'm running out of time. These are all things that you consider that go through your head almost unconsciously as you're doing your externship work. So the Pomodoro method says, hey, we know these come up for you, they come up for everybody. Let's find a way to deal with the external and internal distractions during those short bursts of concentrated work. And the advice that the Pomodoro technique provides for those internal items, record them, right? Or put a tally next to an item on your to-do list if you think about it. Write it down under a new activity, under unplanned and urgent. And then, so basically, it doesn't matter how you do it. They're telling you to take notes on this internal distraction while you're working so that you can just clear it out of your head. You can't punish yourself that it came up, but it doesn't have to occupy space in your mind, right? Put it on the paper and move on. And what the research says is that often when you go back to those things after the fact, when your Pomodoro cycle ends, things that you thought in the moment were really important generally aren't that important, but you want to get them down on paper so that you can free up your mind and not be distracted. And then as far as external distractions, this is difficult if you're working in an office space where there's a lot of activity. You certainly want to be part of that office space. But there are times where you just need to get work done. And so make sure if you are in an office space or if you're at home, if you're at the library, these days we're working everywhere, make sure you're in a space that you are not visually distracted, audibly distracted by things like the library. And your phone, another external distraction, put it away. Turn it off, place it on airplane mode just for those 25 minutes. And then you can check it at a break if you're using the Pomodoro method. Okay, so the next one is the Eisenhower Matrix. Yes, named after Eisenhower, and you may have heard of this, but something worth reminding you about. The Pomodoro technique works if you have a really good to-do list. And in order to come up with a really good to-do list at your externship site, or that includes both your externship work and your schoolwork, people find the Eisenhower Matrix very helpful. So the Eisenhower Matrix is just that. It has you evaluate your tasks according to certain criteria. So it has you place them in the categories of important, unimportant, urgent or not urgent, and then in quadrants. So the important and urgent quadrant are things that need to be done immediately. This is just things that cannot be put off. An example might be, because we also have to account for your personal life, picking up your child at school, right? The daycare charges extra if you leave your child there for an extra 5 minutes. That's an important and urgent item, a red item that needs to be done right away. So the important, not urgent quadrant, those are things that they're not urgent, but we should do them soon. And a lot of things fall into this category. Probably most of your externship work will fall into this category. Then we go to the unimportant, urgent quadrant. Those are things that maybe you can ask your roommate to do. Maybe you can ask a family member to do. You are human, and so there's only so many hours in a day. And then finally, things that tend to fall in the unimportant, not urgent quadrant, don't do them. Avoid them and ignore them for now. You have a lot on your plate with your externship, with your coursework, and you don't want your studies to suffer. These are great learning opportunities for you. You want to make a good impression, be able to get a letter of recommendation if possible, and you don't want your grades to slip as well. So there's a lot on your plate, but it's all time well spent, I assure you. Classroom learning and experiential learning go hand in hand to really make you a well-rounded student ready to enter the workforce. So these are some reminders of effective time management strategies that you can use during your externship semester. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, I'll be rooting for you. Thanks.